to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I'm going to talk about something that I don't normally talk about. Honestly, I've maybe written about it a little bit over the past few years, but I don't really talk about it much. It's not one of my primary focuses, but we're going to talk about healthcare. And so it's very interesting the times that we're in right now, especially legislatively. So I wanted to kind of do something a little bit educational. So I did a little diving into this topic and I learned quite a bit. So I wanted to share some of that with you. But before I get into that, you already know what I'm going to tell you to do. You got to like this, you got to share this. And if you haven't already subscribed, do that right now. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new podcast episode. Also, check out my Substack called Chasing Liberty. You can find that at libertychasers.com. Become a subscriber. I talk about all things liberty, talk about government injustice, overreach, all of that good stuff. So check out my Substack, Chasing Liberty, at libertychasers.com. So let's go ahead and get into this. What I want to do is I want to give kind of a history of how we got to where we are in America as far as health insurance. Now, note I'm saying health insurance right now, not necessarily health care. They're not the same thing, which we all kind of know that, but sometimes we combine the two and we treat them as if they're the same. But if your chances are, if you're watching this, you get your health insurance through your employer. You're probably a W-2 employee, and that's how you can get your insurance. And I'll go over some of the numbers on that. Most Americans do, but others get it. They buy it directly if they're freelancers like myself, or you might get it through Medicaid or Medicare, which are government programs. So, but I kind of wanted to give just a snapshot, kind of explaining how we got to where we are right now. So the question is, how did it come to be that so many people in America rely on their employers for health coverage? The journey starts in the early 20th century, before the 1920s, or before the 1920s. Health insurance, at least the way we know it today, did not exist in the United States. Back then, healthcare costs were actually pretty low, and medical care was provided by individual practitioners instead of hospitals. And people typically paid out of pocket for medical services. So there wasn't, paying deductibles and co-pays and yada, 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 all the stuff that we do today. Now, there it wasn't that's not to say that healthcare insurance did not exist at all. I mean, there were limited insurance options, especially for like lost wages, like if you were to fall ill or if you get injured and you didn't really have a way to cover them, you might be able to buy some insurance in case that happens. But that was pretty much it. But this kind of started to change during the Roaring Twenties, right? Baylor University Hospital in Dallas, Texas. I can't talk. They came up with this plan where teachers could pay like a small monthly fee, and then they would get hospital care when they needed it if something happened to them. And this kind of became the prototype for what we now know as Blue Cross. Now today it's called Blue Cross Blue Shield because they merged, but back then it was just Blue Cross. Now, as the Great Depression came about, these hospitals needed a more stable revenue stream, and these plans started to get a little bit more popular, but they were not necessarily tied to employment. So people were still buying this insurance privately. I'm not sure how extensive this was or how common this was, but it was more common than it was before the 1920s. Still, most people paid out of pocket. Again, healthcare costs weren't nearly as insane as they are today. But the real turning point came during World War II. So this war, once we got involved in it, it created a different economic environment. So this is where the government gets involved. So you already know this is where it's going to get bad, right? Because this is where the federal government is really going to get involved in this health insurance thing. So they needed a way to control inflation. So what the federal government did is they imposed wage controls and price controls. And if you're a liberty-minded thinker, you already know where this is going. Whether you're conservative or libertarian, you can already tell how this is going to get jacked up. Now, these controls did not necessarily apply to fringe benefits like health insurance and some other things. So, since employers had the wages that they get paid capped, they couldn't offer more in salary to attract workers. So what did they offer? Health insurance. Yeah, you're going to get the same pay at my company as you would at company B, but you also get health insurance through my company. And it was a way to compete better in the market because of the government imposed wage caps and price caps. So just to keep giving a few examples of some of this legislation, in 1942, you had the Emergency Price Control Act, which established the Office of Price Administration, which was responsible for controlling prices on essential goods to prevent inflation during wartime. Now, this included setting price ceilings on many of the products and services people bought back then. Then you had the excuse me. Then you had the Stabilization Act of 1942. So to kind of accompany the price controls and stabilize the economy, this act gave the president the authority to stabilize wages and salaries. Now, as a result, you have the creation of the War Labor Board to oversee and enforce these controls on wages. So the War Labor Board imposed some pretty strict controls on wage increases. Uh, Businesses were not allowed to raise wages above a certain level without government approval. Think about that. So these companies had to ask permission to give their workers a raise or to offer a better salary than one of their competitors. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Isn't there like an ism word for that, right? But again, the policy was ostensibly intended to prevent an inflationary spiral that would undermine the war effort. So that's where these health insurance plans came into play. For starters, like I said, it was a way for employers to find ways to compete, alternative ways to attract and retain employees in a still competitive labor market. Offering health insurance and other fringe benefits became a valuable tool for this purpose. And they weren't subject to the same controls as wages, which meant that they didn't really have a ceiling on this. So, I mean, whoever offered the better health plan might get the better employees. The second issue here is in 1943, the IRS ruled that employer contributions to health insurance premiums were tax exempt, meaning that if your employer was paying for your insurance, they could write that off on their taxes, which was another huge benefit for the businesses. And the employees did not have to report this as taxable income. So there was a tax advantage for both parties. So again, you can see how this is kind of starting to grow. And I guess people, I mean, I'm sure there were people already sounding the clarion call as to where this could go, but you can kind of already see what the government is incentivizing here. The government is incentivizing a healthcare environment in which most Americans are going to be dependent on their employer to get their health insurance. Another issue was the role of unions. Unions were getting a lot of play during this time period. This is when they really started to come up, and they played a significant role because they were able to negotiate for better health benefits as part of these collective bargaining agreements that they would hammer out. So these benefits really helped to establish the, or I'll say that the beginnings of our current health insurance industry. So after the war, the wage and price controls were lifted. So, yay, all right, now I can give my employee a raise without having to ask Uncle Sam permission to pay my own employee at my own company more of my money that I want to give him to work for me. Right, great. Finally, they relented. But the health insurance model that was installed, it stayed. And not only did it stay, it expanded. So employers continue to offer health benefits as a means of attracting and retaining good talent. And the tax advantages that were in place, those also stayed, which provided even a further incentive for this system to continue. Now, the problem, though, is that the decisions that were made during World War II had long-term consequences for the healthcare system. The employer-sponsored system became the dominant method of coverage for working Americans. And it also created some issues like coverage gaps for those who are not in traditional employment roles and an over reliance on employment to access healthcare. And I'm using the word healthcare because nowadays it's hard to get healthcare if you don't have health insurance. I mean, and we can go down the rabbit hole on this, guys. And I actually plan to do more research on this to really get into this. But if you've been through this, you already know. You probably had personal experiences with how much of with how much of an issue this is. So the thing is, when you fast forward, well, actually, let me just roll it back a bit. Um, okay, no, I covered that. So if we fast forward a little bit further, let's go to say the 1960s. So we had the health insurance model installed and people were getting insurance from their employers, which they still are. But then in the 1960s, the government even stepped up its role in the healthcare industry even more to supposedly address the needs of those outside of the employer-based system, because there are still a lot of people who maybe they don't have the traditional type of employment. In 1965, Medicare and Medicaid were created. Medicare provided health insurance for Americans aged 65 and older, and Medicaid offered assistance to low income individuals and families. Now, this was again, so here's where the government always pitches itself as the solution to the problems that it created. So it created the problem of these disparities because not everybody was on employer based health insurance that the government helped to build. So now they have to come up with a way to address those who may not be able to access employer based insurance. So this is yet another reason for the government to expand. What the government does is they create a problem and that ends up expanding the government. Then when there's problems that come up because of that solution, now we got to come up with another solution, which just expands the government even further and takes more control away from the average citizens. You probably heard the saying, the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. In the world of health insurance, this is very, 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 very true. So in the 1970s and in the 80s, this is really where a lot of the healthcare costs started to skyrocket. And this led to very substantial changes in the employer-based model. Employers began shifting more costs to employees through higher premiums, deductibles, and copays. So now this system that was designed to kind of ease the burden a bit to make it more attractive to work for a company. Well, now in the 70s and 80s, now even the companies are starting to say, oh, we got to jack up these premiums a bit. You got to pay more on your deductibles and your copays. And then there was also the rise of health maintenance organizations, or HMOs, which were supposed to control costs by emphasizing preventive care and cost-effective treatment options. Then we get to 2010, and this is where we see a major shift with the Patient Protection and the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as the ACA, also known as Obamacare. Now, Obamacare mandated that employers with 50 or more full-time employees provide health insurance or face penalties, which only reinforced the role of employers in providing coverage. So back in during the World War II, they were like, okay, we got to create health insurance because we can't raise wages and we can't, pay people more money. So we got to offer health insurance. So they did it by choice and people could choose to work for those companies. Now in 2010, now they have to do it. It's amazing. So this system that was, well, we can say accidentally created by the government. I wouldn't go that far. My tinfoil hat is too tight for that. So they created the system, and now by 2010, they're mandating that businesses use it. And by the way, I mean, individual citizens had to be enrolled in some type of health insurance, or they had to pay an extra tax for it. Yeah, I remember that. Um, so today, most Americans that are under the age of 65 receive health insurance through their employers. 54.5% of the population gets their insurance at the place where they work, according to census.gov. About 18.8% get Medicaid, 18.7% get Medicare, and about 9.9% buys their health insurance directly. But this has created a lot of challenges, right? So one of the issues with the employer-based model is that it can create instability for people who lose their jobs or they decide to change jobs. If your employment status changes because you're laid off or you decide to work for a different company or you get hurt or reductions in work hours, all that stuff can affect your health insurance coverage, which means that you don't really have that much control, right? Your employer does. Your employer has a lot more control over your health insurance and how you can get health care than you do. um, this actually was a huge issue during the COVID-19 pandemic when so many Americans lost their jobs and they lost their health insurance in the middle of a pandemic. Especially with companies where they wanted to mandate the vaccine. You remember Joe Biden was really pushing that, and state governments were pushing that too. Yeah, that led to a lot of people being out of work, which means that they didn't have insurance during a pandemic. Well, okay. Um, Another issue is the rise of the gig economy. Has been a sharp increase in part-time and contract work or freelance work, and that means that they don't get employer-based insurance because you're not a W-2 employee. So part-time, temporary, freelance workers don't get these benefits from the companies that they're working with, which means that there's a substantial segment that doesn't have access to affordable health insurance. So they're either paying through the nose for it, or they're getting it some other way, or they're just taking the risk and not having it. Um, that's an issue as well. And then there's also the economic burden on employers and employees. The cost of providing insurance in 2024 has become a far more bigger burden than it was back in the day where healthcare was a lot more affordable. Again, I'm talking about healthcare because back then there wasn't really insurance the way we have it today. People are facing rising premiums. And really, and in some instances, it gives the corporations more control over their employees. I mean, if you're working at a crappy job, but the benefits are good, then you might be less likely to quit or to find something else. It might make it harder. So there's a lot of problems that come with this. And I'll be highlighting more of these and also discussing solutions. But I really just wanted to give kind of a quick history of how we got to where we are right now. There are a lot of people proposing solutions, and one of which is something that I'm going to be talking about a lot more. It's HR 5608 at the federal level. It's called the Access Act. I'm not going to go into it right now, but basically, this legislation would be designed to give people a little bit more control over their health care because it doesn't rely so much on insurance. It involves healthcare savings accounts, which a lot of you have probably heard of. A lot of people may even get that through their jobs. But in this way, it would actually give people more money, or give them back some of the money that is stolen from them through through that taxation or extortion or whatever you want to call it. Give back some of that money so that they can have these accounts so that they can actually better direct their own healthcare decisions rather than being subject to what insurers say you can get. So I just wanted to kind of leave you with that, and we'll be talking about this more. I'm very excited to be diving into this. But let me know what you guys think. Maybe is there an aspect of this that you guys think I should talk about, or something that you want to learn more about, or just give me your thoughts. Hit me up in the comments, or y'all know how to reach me. You follow me on Twitter and everywhere else. I want to know what you guys think. All right, but until next time, catch you on the flip side.